Hello there, I'm a day late reviewing 1951's The Thing from Another World. And no, I'm not talking about Madonna. She arrived in 1958. Of course, I'm referring to the sci-fi horror movie classic. The Thing from Another World is based on the John W. Campbell Jr. novella Who Goes There? And like many Hollywood productions, the movie bears little resemblance to the source material. Campbell, for his part, said he understood why the changes were made, that he felt the story was too scary for audiences at the time, but he hoped that the movie might get people interested in reading science fiction. A flight crew headed by Captain Pat Hendry in Anchorage, Alaska, is ordered to investigate a crash of an unknown craft near a research station at the North Pole. Once the team arrives at the research station, they are introduced to the scientists there, and then they head to the crash site. Once at the site, they see that there's a long line of freshly frozen ice that leads to a much larger area of freshly frozen ice. It is believed the thin line is where the craft first hit the ground and the larger area is where it came to rest. There is a large fin sticking through the ice, and they get some shaving samples from it to test the metal. The lead scientist, Dr. Carrington, then suggests that they fan out to the edges of the craft to get the idea of its shape and size. Once they get to the edges, they discover that it's a pretty large circle, like a saucer, a flying saucer. The craft is frozen under a fair amount of ice, and rather than spending days or weeks trying to get to the craft using pickaxes, they decide to try and melt the ice using thermite. This goes about as well as most government projects do, and they run into a snafu. The craft catches fire and then explodes. Fortunately, or as it turns out, unfortunately, one of the troops with a Geiger counter detects some increased radioactivity, and they discover a pilot of the craft frozen nearby. This time they use the axis to cut out the block of ice with the body in it to take back to the research station. Once back at the research station, they put it in a cold storage room, and Dr. Carrington and his band of scientists are eager to start chipping away at the ice to study the body. Captain Hendry says no can do until he receives orders from the higher-ups. They organize a watch of the block of ice, and the others go into the hallway so the scientists can voice their objections at being made to wait to examine the body. The "let's get to the body now" faction is worried that it being frozen could damage the body, and the "hold on a moment" faction points out that the body could be carrying disease that they have no immunity to. They argue back and forth for a bit until it is decided to call back to Alaska for instructions from the general. Bad weather is fouling the transmission of messages, and they don't receive any clear instructions on what to do. Captain Hendry orders his radio man to help the station's radio man to try and get a message through to the general for better instructions on what to do with the body. Until they get said instructions, the body stays on ice.
No way!
Later, one of the airmen comes to the captain and suggests that they shorten the watch on the block of ice, as it is beginning to clear up and they can make some detail of the body within. It's unsettling. Also, the room is very cold since they broke out the window to keep the block of ice from melting. The captain agrees to shorten the watch to only 2 hours. Hendry then tries to rekindle his romance with Dr. Carrington's secretary, Ms. Nicholson. They have a history. In the storage room, the next person at watch is Corporal Barnes, and he doesn't like the look of the creature. Seeing the blanket nearby, he uses it to cover the block so he doesn't have to look at the thing. Unknown to him, it's an electric blanket that the lieutenant preceding him used to keep warm. He then sits at a nearby table and starts reading a book. Before his shift is over, the electric blanket manages to melt that block of ice sufficiently enough that the creature gets out. Barnes hears it get up, and he shoots it several times before he flees into the mess hall to warn the others. They muster up some weapons, and then they check the storage room. The thing is gone. They then hear the dogs barking and something growling outside. Looking out of one of the windows, they see that the thing is fighting with the sled dogs. The airmen gather some parkas and guns and head out to the fight, but the thing has fled after killing 2 of the dogs. The dogs did manage to sever one of the thing's arms before it took off. The airmen find the arm and return to the compound. Dr. Carrington and his team of scientists examine the arm, and they determine that it isn't made of animal tissue, but vegetable tissue. Everyone is amazed. The reporter tells the doc that his readers aren't going to believe stories of an intelligent plant. We then get a little history of evolution from Dr. Carrington and some botany facts from one of his colleagues. Then the fingers on the severed arms start moving, and they notice that the blood on it from the dogs is gone. In the time it took for the arm to thaw, it absorbed the blood and came back to life.
No way!
One of the airmen arrives with several axes, and the captain and the other airmen start searching for the thing. Dr. Carrington begs that they don't kill it, that it has immeasurable knowledge and was attacked after it awoke from the block of ice. Captain Hendry says that they will try to capture it, but he makes no promises if things get ugly. They begin their search, and they make it to the greenhouse, and they see various plants growing there. Dr. Carrington notices that some of the plants have wilted, but he doesn't kill Captain Hendry. He waits until the airmen have cleared the room and moved on to talk with his fellow scientists in private. The only way for the plants to have wilted is if the back door to the outside had been opened, letting a cold blast of air in. They then discover a dead dog in a storage bin, drained of all its blood. Dr. Carrington and the other scientists decide to set up a watch in the greenhouse, to wait for the thing to come back so they can try and talk to it. Cut to some time later. The airmen are coming back into the base after having looked outside the immediate area. The radioman says that he was able to receive some messages from General Fogarty, instructing them to preserve the craft and any survivors from the crash. Just then, one of the scientists opens the door and he says, "The greenhouse," and collapses. The nurse revives him with smelling salts, and he tells his tale of woe. They were doing some work in the greenhouse when the back door opened and the thing entered. It attacked one of the other scientists first, and then knocked him out. When he awoke, he saw that the thing had killed the other 2 scientists and hung them from the rafters upside down with their throats cut. The airmen head to the greenhouse. Half split off to go outside and block the back door. Hendry and his team take the front entrance. They open the door and the thing is standing right there, and it takes a swing at Hendry, who ducks out of the way and closes the door on the thing's arm. It yanks its arm free from the door, and one of the airmen fires his rifle through the door. The airmen then gather some lumber to wedge against the door so that the thing cannot escape. When Dr. Carrington and his coterie arrive, Captain Hendry chooses him a new orifice for not telling him about the dead dog that they had found earlier. Carrington replies that he didn't think it was any of the captain's business. Hendry then tells Carrington that since he didn't tell him about it, there are now 2 dead scientists hanging from the rafters. He then tells the good doctor that he is limiting his access about the camp to just his lab, his room, and the mess hall. Dr. Carrington doesn't take kindly to being told what he can do in his camp. One of the airmen subtly reminds him that people with guns make the rules, while those without guns follow them. The airmen then set up a watch in the hallway, and we cut to Dr. Carrington's lab. Dr. Carrington makes his case to his colleagues. Their battle, as scientists, is trying to make the thing understand that humans are intelligent and not just cattle to be slaughtered. That there is so much that they can learn from it if they could just find a way to communicate successfully. Exhausted, he has his secretary read his notes. It turns out that after his watch in the greenhouse, he came back to his lab with some seed pods from the thing's arm and planted them in some soil in his office. He then took several units of plasma from the infirmary and is using it to grow new things.
What?
Multiple bulbs have already arisen from the ground, pulsating with life. Surprisingly, his colleagues are a little reticent about growing more of the things. What if they aren't friendly? What if they're here to take over and use humans as livestock? Dr. Carrington won't hear of it. Only the science matters. Consequences be damned. Thankfully, that could never happen today. Later, while Dr. Carrington's secretary Nicky is typing up his notes, Captain Hendry comes in. He says he delivered 35 units of blood plasma several weeks back, and they aren't using them on the injured scientist in the infirmary. Does she have any idea what happened to them? She shows him the notes that she just typed up. Hendry is less than thrilled. Captain Hendry and several airmen confront Dr. Carrington about his experiment. Several of the scientists agree that it poses too great a risk. The radioman then arrives with news from General Fogarty. He has finally received notice that the craft was destroyed, but that they found the pilot. He wants all measures taken to keep the pilot alive until he can get there. Carrington is thrilled at the news and returns to his work in his lab. Hendry orders the radioman to try to get a hold of General Fogarty again so that they can update him on how dangerous the thing is. The weather keeps getting worse, so the outside guards come in saying they can't see anything and they're freezing to death. Hendry agrees that it's pointless to continue the outside guard. They then start to discuss what they can do if the thing escapes and tries to attack them. Guns don't hurt it. Scotty the reporter asks, "What do you do with the vegetable?" Nicky says to boil it, stew it, bake it, fry it. This gives one of the others the idea to set it on fire using kerosene. Just then, the Geiger counter starts to go off. The creature is on the move. The counter starts to click off faster. It's coming towards them. They gather some kerosene into pails and wait. They then turn off the lights so you can see the flames better in the dark. The thing arrives and opens the door. One of the airmen douses it with kerosene and another fires a flare gun at it. It takes a swing at an airman, knocking him backwards. The thing then gets doused with another pail of kerosene. It flails about trying to hit the airman. A final pail of kerosene causes the thing to dive through a window and flee into the storm. The airmen grab their fire extinguishers and put the fires out in the room. Later in the mess hall, Captain Henry says he wants everyone to stay there. They found a way to hurt the thing, but burned out a room in the process, and they only have so many rooms they can afford to lose. One of the scientists says that electricity would be better because it burns hotter than kerosene. Several of the airmen agree that it's a good idea and move to help set up an area to create an electric arc. Meanwhile, Henry wants the radio men to try to reach General Fogarty again and tell him that they need help. Nikki notices that she can see Henry's and Scotty's breath. The thing has cut the fuel oil to the heating system. Unfortunately, the fuel tank is outside, and so is the thing. Henry decides to move everyone to the generator room where they can stay warm with electricity. Since they barred the back exit, the only way to the generator room is down one hallway. Two of the airmen decide that they can build the electric flytrap in the hallway. Henry agrees and everybody moves to get to work. As they near completion, Dr. Carrington comes along with this to say.
Knowledge is more important than life, Captain. We've only one excuse for existing: to think, to find out, to learn.
Needless to say, everyone else has a different opinion on the matter. They turn off a number of the lights in the hallway so the thing won't see what they've set up for it. The Geiger counter starts to flash again, and just in time as the temperature in the base is dropping fast. Captain Henry and several others gather near the end of the hallway in order to offer a meek defense with the hope that as they fall back, this will cause the thing to chase them and fall into their trap. Then what comes is possibly the silliest moment of the film. The thing opens the door and easily smashes the posts that were blocking the doorway. It might have been more helpful if the door opened outwards instead of inwards. Oh well. The thing picks up a large piece of lumber and slowly lumbers menacingly forward. Then the lights go out. Dr. Carrington has turned off the generator to prevent them from hurting the thing. They rush back to the generator room and Dr. Carrington is holding a gun. He won't let them harm the thing. One of the other scientists grabs the gun away from Carrington, and Henry says to turn the generator back on, while he heads back out into the hallway to face off against the creature again. Dr. Carrington comes rushing by and stops in front of the thing, pleading for it to understand him, that he means it no harm. They can learn so much from one another. The thing backhands him and continues towards the others. It gets to the trap and they turn on the electric arc. The current is hot enough and the creature begins to shrink in size and smolder. They leave it on long enough to destroy it.
Excellent!
Later they gather in the radio room, Scotty finally getting to tell his story. He gives a short intro to all the people that are up there, and says that before he gets to the gory details, he offers up this warning.
Watch the skies, everywhere. Keep looking. Keep watching the skies.
The end. Well, that was The Thing from Another World. Tamed by today's standards, it is considered by many to be a horror classic, and you can count me among those people. I love this film. It has smart dialogue and tells a good story. One of the things I love about it, it's a glimpse into how people behaved in the 1950s. The film opens in an officers' club in Anchorage, and everyone is in their dress uniform. For recreation, imagine that. You would think that they would be in their combat fatigues or service uniforms, which they wear for the bulk of the rest of the movie. But I would venture that cultural norms were less casual back then. Another observation I made was thanks to Secretary Nikki Nicholson. It is often thought that women in this time period were secondary to men, seen as either the perfect homemaker or a damsel in distress in films. But here, Nikki is easily giving as good as she gets in her flirting and verbal sparring with Captain Henry. It's all very playful and not mean-spirited at all. Also, it is Nikki that comes up with the idea that since bullets won't hurt the thing, to try fire. Men and women coming together to find a solution to their problems. And all this was 70 years ago. Can you imagine? I guess that is what I like about this film. The sense of camaraderie between everybody, especially the airmen. Sure, they tease one another at times, as men are oft to do, but they obviously care about one another, and they work together towards staying alive and defeating the thing. When things don't go to plan, they adapt without losing unit cohesion and turning on one another. Well, barring Dr. Carrington anyways. I don't know. To me, it just feels inspirational, and I like it for that. In the credits of the movie, Christian Nyby is listed as the director. He is mostly known for this film and lots of television from the 60s and 70s, including Mayberry RFD, Bonanza, and Adam 12. But It has been said by many members of the cast that producer Howard Hawks ghost-directed the film. Hawks is known for His Girl Friday, Sergeant York, To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep, and one of my favorite movies, Rio Bravo. The script was written by Charles Lederer, best known for His Girl Friday, The Thing from Another World, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and the 1960 version of Ocean's 11. It stars Kenneth Tobey, Margaret Sheridan, and Robert Cornthwaite, with James Arness as The Thing. All do an excellent job. The film came out before the standard rating system came into effect, but was approved for general audiences. In the US, it currently has a TV PG rating. There is some mild graphic violence with the Thing being set on fire, and there is talk about the two dead scientists with their throats being cut, so it might be a little intense for young children. The movie cost $1.6 million to make, and it took in $1.95 million, so with Hollywood accounting, it lost money. It has a 7.1 out of 10 rating on IMDb. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an 86% per critics and 73% per audience scores. Both are good scores, but I would agree with the critics on this one. So if you're looking for a movie this Halloween and you don't want a gore fest, you just might enjoy this film. Check it out. Thanks for watching, and until next time.